Hey folks, this is Billy DKY, the truth seeker that simplifies and demystifies. This is going to be the video Happiness and the Path. And I knew this a long time ago, but I hadn't realized I hadn't really shared it with everybody based on some comments, so I wanted to go ahead and share it. You know, a lot of people get confused what the path's about. They think, oh, the path is about happiness, but it's really not about happiness per se, because happiness is nothing more than emotion. Think of how ridiculous it would be to say, you know, the path is about sadness. So, you know, the end goal is to seek peace by dealing with all your emotions and dealing with everything. So, let's talk about let's first start off with what it's like if you don't follow the path. Okay, so we got not following the path. So notice over here, you start out, let's say you're starting out in life, you're really pretty much happy, and this circle, the size of the circle determines how much happiness you have. And so you're not really facing things, you're indulging deeper and deeper in pleasures and being more self-centered. So your circle is shrinking on you because you're not dealing with things, and it just keeps shrinking and shrinking. And by every issue that you run from, it just keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller until it's nothing but a point you have absolutely no happiness whatsoever. And notice again, not facing issues, your happiness just continues to degrade. And basically that's what I got caught up in. I didn't get caught up in drugs or anything like that, but I wasn't facing issues, and as a result I just kept becoming more and more miserable until I actually reached a point where I hadn't had a happy moment in a whole month. And so that was the point, that was my breaking point. I had two choices. I could either start dealing with things or I could commit suicide. I chose to live, obviously, because you're watching this video. And so here's what happens when you follow the path. So over here's where I started out. I started out with no happiness whatsoever. I mean, I got rid of everything. I didn't care what I had to do. I got rid of my wife because I didn't want to blame things on her. I was like, boom, I don't need anybody around me because I got to deal with everything. I didn't want any excuses. You know what I mean? I started cutting back at work, you know, and just dealing with everything. Gave up my friends. I didn't care. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to live. So that's what this is about. You start from a place of complete misery, which that's what the Buddha, he was even at the point where he's like, the dust is heavy around here. You know what I'm saying? That is bad. And really, most truth seekers, real truth seekers, they get to that point where they have absolutely no happiness, but they're great men and they fight. You know what I'm saying? They find the greatness within themselves and they start progressing. And so notice, as you start dealing with things, boom, you get happier. And notice this line, this line sort of represents anything within inside that circle represents where you're okay, and anything outside of it's where you're sort of real unhappy. And so as you face things that make you unhappy, that circle gets bigger where you're really sort of content in a lot of different spaces. So again, notice as you deal with things, your ability to deal with things is increasing. Your area of happiness is greater, or I could say the area where you're not miserable is greater. So, and boom, and then eventually over here, I don't know what's over here yet, but you know, a lot of these guys that seek enlightenment, eventually they reach a spot where it's just like, it's all golden. I think Morrie Shiba had a spot where he was, I think he got done doing some training and whatnot, and he took a drink of water just like this, and everything turned golden. So it was like an enlightenment moment for him. So I haven't reached an enlightenment moment like, I mean, I had plenty of moments I could talk about, but none like that. So I'm assuming there's a point where you can deal with everything and just there's no spot really which you're miserable. So I think that's probably what enlightenment's about. So again, notice over here, my happiness was pretty big, but I wasn't dealing with things, and my area of contentment kept decreasing and decreasing. Or my area of not misery kept decreasing until everything was misery. So I'm thinking that's the enlightenment's the opposite, where there's nothing that makes you miserable. You know what I'm saying? And you also see this pattern too with a lot of people who, you know, these elite people or high society. They just they're not happy. They got everything, but they're completely miserable. So, okay. So here's and again, I've said this before. I want to say it again too. It's not about being happy. It's about being less miserable. You can actually be less miserable. You can't necessarily be happy. Which the funny thing is, I'm happier now than I've ever been because I ain't seeking it. It's misery is what makes you unhappy. You know what I'm saying? So focus on being less miserable, removing things from your life that makes you miserable. Okay. A lot of people fail on the path because they don't understand what's happening and what's going to happen to them once they decide to start dealing with things. So let me point that out so you can already expect it. And if you expect it, it's still going to be difficult, but at least you're not thinking, you know, you're off the track. So if you start following the path, you will make progress, and your circle of happiness, or where you're not miserable, will continue to grow. And this is how the red line sort of is your projection of how you're really growing. And this black line is how you're growing, but it's also how your emotions are at as you're making progress. So notice up here, this is your peace, and over here is time. As you're making progress through time, so you start out on the path. You'll say you start out where I started out. You're completely miserable. You start getting a little happier because you're making progress, and you can feel it. You're like, oh man, finally I'm free, baby. You know, and you think, boy, it's just going to continue to go happy, and then all of a sudden you run into something, your senses are more heightened. And you can see things that you didn't see before, and all of a sudden, boom, you're back to miserable. Boom, you go way down here, you're miserable. You've actually made progress, but you're miserable. You're unhappy, depressed, you're pissed off because the world ain't the way you thought it was. And then boom, you start dealing with it, and you start making progress, and you push past it, and then you hit another happy moment. Yeah, I'm happy again. And that cycle just continues all the way up. And then eventually you start not getting caught up too much in the highs, the emotional highs of making progress. And then you know, and that limits your lows as well. And basically your goal is to be even-keeled, peace. And a lot of problems with being depressed and stuff like that is allowing yourself to be caught up on the highs. You're going to have to go through the lows if you want to or not. And a lot of times the lows, how low the low is, depends on how elated you allow yourself to be during the highs. So the highs is really the best place to work on yourself, because that's where you have some control. So anyway, don't give up the first time you hit a stumbling block or something that's difficult. Because when I first started this, I tell my mom about it. Oh man, she's excited about it too. She was getting on it. She was doing it. First time she hit anything that was miserable, though, she gave up and quit. So if you're going to give up and quit, this path isn't for quitters. You look at this again. Look at all those lows. That's a quitting spot. That's where a quitter will quit. This ain't where you quit. You don't quit on a high. You quit on a low. And let's say you make it up here, boom, you, yeah, I'm happy again. This is where you quit. Those are all the quitting spots. That's where a quitter will quit. There ain't no place on the path for quitters. If you're going to quit, you shouldn't probably even get started, I don't guess. But, you know, you do whatever you want to do. Anyway, I want to throw that out there because I've known it for a long time, and I used to talk about it with people I worked with. But anyway, until the next video, later, folks.